Hi, everyone. Welcome to Fire and Forte, and we're continuing this sustainability special. We're going to jump straight in. Can you introduce your business and also how you came to build it to the audience, please?
Absolutely. So Trace is a climate tech business. So we're a software platform that enables small to medium enterprise to reach net zero emissions. So that's obviously a long-term goal for governments, businesses, individuals across the next 10, 20, 30 years. We want to be the software and the solution that helps businesses on that journey because it is a long journey, but it is definitely feasible with the right tools and the right education. So Trace is really there to enable the measurement of emissions, the reduction of emissions, offsetting of emissions, if that's what a company chooses to do, and then of course sharing and playing back that impact to their stakeholders.
Very relevant, extremely needed at the moment, with sustainability targets being, like you say, in every business's strategy. And I actually recently saw a release from IKEA or Inca Investment saying how big small to medium enterprises were in this space, and that you often think it's big businesses that have this big responsibility, but the majority of emissions come from small to medium. I take it that was probably some of the facts that made you go into that area, was it?
Yeah, that's spot on. I mean, my background's actually in big enterprise businesses. So for 10 years before launching Trace, I worked in management consulting across financial services. You might think, how on earth is that relevant? But it was really through working with big enterprise who are generally faster movers, not because necessarily they're nimble, but because the regulation actually imposes requirements for large companies to report on emissions and have a plan for emissions reduction. What that's actually meant it is happening is that those targets and that reporting is trickling down into their supply chains, which more often than not are small to medium enterprise. You know, your accountancy firm, your catering business, your software provider, those are all your suppliers, and they actually contribute to a larger business's emissions. So it was through working in consulting and most recently at Macquarie Group, which is one of the largest renewable energy infrastructure investors in the world. I worked there for 4 years up until 2020. And I did a lot of work in their renewable energy portfolio, and I could just really see that this was a movement. It was gaining so much pace, at least at the top end of town. And meanwhile, my co-founder was working in technology, and we just kept bouncing ideas. And we were like, we want to start a business. There's got to be something here. And we merged the kind of two sides of experience we've had, you know, me in the kind of big end of town and solving this problem from an enterprise perspective, and her solving problems using technology to bring together those skill sets and launch Trace. So yeah, been doing that since 2020. It's been quite the journey, and I look forward to digging into that with you.
I would love to know the story. What was actually making the leap like, and where did you start?
Yeah, great question. I mean, we took probably a bit of a conservative approach, if I'm honest. I take my hats off to anyone that just quits their job and starts a business. So what we did was that we actually found out about an accelerator program back in 2019 that was launching in Australia. It's now fairly well known, but back then it was quite a new concept. It's called Antler. It's a venture capital fund that run what they call the generator program for wannabe founders. So what that allowed us to do was Joanna and I were both able to kind of take time off work, not fully quit, but take unpaid leave and say, let's give this program a shot. And it was essentially a boot camp. So we went in knowing we wanted to work together, knowing we wanted to do something in climate, but without really having any meat on the bones. And we had 10 weeks really to brainstorm ideas, validate them, and take them to a VC and go, is this a venture capital backable business? Luckily, it was. So as a result of that program, we ended up with some seed funding, which meant we were actually able to quit our jobs and take it to the next step. So, I mean, to anyone who's a bit unsure about wanting to start a business, it's a kind of a safe platform from which to start and really kick the tires on an idea. But I know a lot of people also do take the bold approach of just, you know, quitting their job and starting, both very admirable.
I'm assuming that in that program, you get lots of experts coaching you as well along the way, do you? So did you get lots of input that you hadn't been able to access before?
100%. I mean, I've never launched a business before apart from a little side hustle, again, with my co-founder, Joanna, which was in the fashion space, completely, you know, different to climate technology and a completely different business model. So I didn't know the first thing about venture capital and what a go-to-market strategy was and, you know, what B2B SaaS sales and marketing looked like. So all of this program was just building the kind of basic knowledge that we needed, and frankly, kind of the language that we needed to develop in order to talk to investors and talk to potential customers. So yeah, it was definitely a training program. And then very quickly at the end of that, we had to take our training wheels off and just hit the ground running.
Amazing. And then it was resign, was it, from your job? And then
Yeah, I
say,
eventually thought it's worth actually being honest here and saying that I want to give this a real go. So I think I did that kind of start of 2020, and that's when we launched Trace to market.
very exciting. And the platform is so cool. I've seen it from a client perspective in terms of, let's call it a perspective, as opposed to actually being able to use it. So I wondered how and when you got really close to understanding climate data.
Yeah, I mean, good question. It's been a bit of a journey. When we first launched, we were a completely consumer facing product only. So we basically tried to come up with the simplest product that we could launch to market and start testing. That would be my first piece of advice to any kind of wannabe founder, is just get something to market, because that's how you learn. So, to answer your question, how did I learn about climate data and how to analyze that and measure emissions? It was just from giving it a shot and building a prototype, putting it in front of customers, and then going, okay, that worked, that didn't, that needs to get more accurate. I'm missing data here. So we basically built a carbon footprint calculator for individuals. That's still on our website. And you'll see lots of them. They're not particularly unique. There's lots of carbon footprint calculators out there. But by building that, we were able to develop a massive database of what's called emissions factors, which are basically the engine behind a carbon footprint calculation, a lot of which is publicly sourced, but you can also buy from third parties. And it was through building that model in the back end for individuals that I was able to learn all about the greenhouse gas protocol and a number of other standards here in Australia specifically. And that's what we then thought, there's an engine here that we could actually sell into businesses. And about the end of 2020, we decided to pivot into the B2B space.
Amazing. It's interesting that you didn't enter the market with a degree in greenhouse in any of these climate areas, but actually you could see the business need for it. And your co-founder understood probably how to help with the infrastructure. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And then you
Correct,
could
yeah.
learn as you went with the data.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I feel really strongly that you can learn content really easily on the job, but you can't learn mindset and skills. You can't learn the kind of soft skills. I hate that term because it kind of underplays the importance of them. But that's what we hire for, and it's what I think has made us successful, is those kind of softer skills. Being able to learn carbon accounting, you can go and do an online boot camp course for that. You can learn it quickly, and you're never going to learn quicker than actually using the tools and doing it yourself. And I think this is such a nascent space that we can't rely on people having education around this, because we'd be waiting for years for everybody to be upskilled. So the most important thing is that we enable everyone to have enough base understanding about climate and sustainability and emissions that we can all make decisions that are good for the planet.
And are there some resources that you recommend people start reading about? So if you're to go to a client, for example, and talk about Trace, do you link to any, because they're probably even more new to it than anyone else, and you're trying to explain what to measure, why to measure it. What sources might you give them, and what might you give the audience to read upon?
Gosh, it sounds a bit self-serving, but we would probably send them to Trace.
Yeah, perfect.
And to be honest, the reason for that is that our mission is all about cutting through the noise, because there is actually a hell of a lot of content out there. And if you've got time to sift through it, you will be well equipped with learning and things you can read, but equally you might get completely snowed under and overwhelmed by how much content there is out there. So what we've tried to do at Trace is consolidate all of that learning and what we've learned from 3 years of being in this space to try and just make it really user friendly and accessible to anybody, irrespective of your background and education. So yeah, we create a lot of content, both written and webinars, that are free for people to go and learn. And we get like so many people turning up each month just learning, how to measure your business's emissions. We get people turning up, which shows how much people are looking for ways to learn in this space. I mean, that said, there's still some great resources. Like the GHG protocol is probably the best known global standard for carbon accounting. So that's always worth a read if you really want to get into the depths of how it works. But you might get a bit stuck on 200 pages of a PDF. So I'd always try and recommend by learning through a bit more of an engaging channel like a webinar.
I will put links to Trace. I'm going to stop saying our Trace. I was wondering, actually, I thought, I bet Trace wasn't available, and that's why that was.
Correct. Correct.
I'll put the links to webinars and the content that you guys have got, because I think that is a really good point, that you feel as a business founder or a leader in a business that you should know a lot about this area because it is so important. And yet, like you say, it's so new. But where on earth
Yeah.
do you start when you've got a full-time job and you've got responsibilities? So I think that's really helpful. In the webinars, is there an opportunity for Q&A?
Absolutely. Yeah. And they tend to be quite, busy, and people ask lots of questions. So yeah, it shows the breadth of backgrounds that people come to Trace from. It could be the head of people and culture. It could be a founder of a business. It could be an analyst. I mean, we get all sorts of people turning up, which shows that this is a space that kind of everybody wants to be part of, but also it's something that anyone can be part of. And that's really crucial. It's not like financial accounting where you do need to have a background in accounting and really, educational certifications. You don't need that in this space. You just need a learning mindset, and you need the tools to help you deliver.
Excellent. A learning mindset. I love that one. I think as an adult, you get even more curious and keen to learn, which I think is really what we're trying to encourage during this Sustainability Week. I'm interested in the skills that you mentioned, because you talked about soft skills, and I totally agree. That underplays how important they are. What skills have you found that really help you as a business founder in this space that you already had? And which ones have you maybe needed to acquire?
Yeah, I mean, again, I hate the phrasing hard and soft skills, but at least I think most people kind of understand roughly what that means. As a first-time founder, you're pretty much doing everything for the first time. So you really to be somebody that's a quick learner and willing to learn and not scared to try something for the first time. So in terms of hard skills, it's useful that I'm, quite good with numbers, and I love modeling things, and I'm quite commercially driven. But actually the things that have served me better are things like having a learning mindset. And I think really importantly, being relatively low ego. I really believe this is crucial for somebody in startup, because by definition, if you've got a high ego and you think you know everything, you're not going to learn from your customers and your prospects. And it doesn't matter how well you've validated your idea and done your research and gone, wow, I've got a product that everybody needs. If your customers are telling you they don't need it or that they need something different, you need to listen, and you have to. It's very humbling when you think, "Oh, we've got this great idea," and you put it out to market, and you think everyone's going to love this. And then either nobody tries it, or, people give you bad feedback. You have to be willing to listen to that and learn from it. So I think I've spent a lot of time in my past learning about design thinking and human-centered design. And the fundamentals of that is low ego and empathy, really understanding the problems from your customer's perspective. So anyone going into a new area, I'd really encourage them to look at the principles of human-centered design. I think from like a hard skills perspective, you're never going to be bad off with sales experience. Funnily enough, I actually don't have that background, so that's something I've really had to learn very quickly. But I guess with sales just comes, confidence, clear communication, empathy, organization skills, because you've got to be building a pipeline and organize, being really diligent about organizing that pipeline. But if you've got a background in sales, anything, selling charity donations on the street, selling door to door, picking up the phone. Sales can take so many different forms. That is always going to serve you well in a startup, from my point of view. So we always look for that. And then I think finally, ability to kind of zoom in and out of the details is something that has served me pretty well. It's something it's very difficult, as a founder and a CEO. I need to be able to see the really big picture and go, where are we going? Where is this business going to be in 1, 5, 10 years? But equally, you're solving very specific problems on a day-to-day basis that come from your customers or come from the technology. So you do need to be able to have that ability to zoom in and out and kind of know when to look deep and when not to, and stay above the water.
I think we've really benefited from the fact that you've been in this position for 3 years, because I wonder if now when you look back, what you know now versus how much you must have learned over the last 3 years. It must be almost unimaginable how much you've experienced and achieved.
Yeah, 100%. I've said, when people say, how has the last 3 years been? I say, well, I've learned more in 3 years than I have in my entire career to date. Probably I learned more in a month than I did in my entire career to date. And, my previous career still involved a lot of learning. You are basically doing absolutely everything. Like, I'm the head of finance, I'm the head of people, I'm the head of culture, I'm the head of sales, the head of marketing. I mean, you just have to be everything to everyone. And that is intense, but that's why it's so rewarding.
Incredible, very multi-talented team and two founders. I mean, it is so great as well to know that it's two female founders that are thriving this space. Thanks for this advice. I think keeping open ears is a really good point around listening to your customers and the ego. That's something that must be quite difficult, but is that something that you've tried to ingrain in the business, that actually clients can really, that you can iterate your product based on that feedback?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's something that we're always working on with the team, and I think they're very good at. But you can always get better at insights gathering, I think, because there's a difference between listening to feedback and assuming it's an insight, and then turning feedback into an insight. Customers will always be asking you for features. When you put a product in front of them, they'll go, "Oh, it'd be great if there was a button here, or if you could do this, or if you could see this chart." Sometimes people just say that because they want to sound clever or they think it sounds nice. It doesn't necessarily mean they need it. So the ability to go the level below and really go like, would that be useful to you? Would you use that button if it were there? Tell me about a time when you've used a similar feature. Those are where you actually get real insights from. So we do a lot of internal training and just constant like retrospectives with the team going, what have we learned this month? What are some of the quotes we've heard people talk about? How have we seen people use the product and what can we actually learn from that? It's something that it's a skill that is incredibly valuable and can always be improved.
And creates this constant feedback loop of learning, I think, doesn't it? Directly, if you've got that actual rhythm of doing that in a monthly basis, you're constantly feeding it back in, digesting it, and you don't miss anything, which I can imagine if you're moving so quickly, you could miss so much good information, couldn't you?
Yeah, so true. I mean, part of the challenge with that is the volume of insights, and you can't act on every single one of them. So that's another skill that my co-founder in particular is excellent at. She's a product manager by background, which I didn't really know what a product manager did before starting Trace. But essentially, you're taking all of these customer needs and all of this feedback and insights from your customers and your customer success team and from your sales team, and you're constantly prioritizing it. And it's a tough job because you're always saying, no, can't do that. Don't have, we don't have the resources because, of course, we don't have unlimited technology resources. So being able to sift through and go, wow, that insight's actually going to really change the dial on how we solve our customer needs versus another one is something that is very important in a startup. So yeah, I mean, if I could give one piece of advice to another founder, I'd say find a product manager as a co-founder. It's incredibly valuable.
Well, that's very helpful, I think, for my next question, actually, considering skills and experience or qualifications, which so far I'm thinking this is sounding quite good. Kat's saying there's lots of transferable skills and an open mindset. But I was wondering if someone was looking into climate tech as an area to move into, potentially as a second career, what kind of skills, experience? I know you've also talked about mindset, but if there are some areas that maybe that you recruit for or you can see recruiting for in the future, and what kind of background or experience you might be looking for?
Yeah, again, I would say it's not normally educational. It's normally work experience and what that proves that you have in terms of kind of your learning mindset, as I've talked about before, and your soft skills. I mean, our focus for the next 6 months is really on growth. So we're not currently hiring kind of product and tech, but I'm sure in the future we will be. So I'll put kind of product and technology to one side because that is one way you kind of do need a lot of experience with coding. But on the sales and growth side, I think it's most important to us that you can see people that have proven that they have a growth mindset and have ideally in a startup environment. That doesn't mean they have to work from a startup environment. I think what we're trying to prove is that people are happy to get their hands dirty, are quick problem solvers, they have hustle, they have resilience, they don't get blocked when they're not sure how to solve a problem, they just try something out. You've got to be quite fearless in that sense. Quite hard to test for that, and you can't always see it on LinkedIn. So having worked at a startup is a good way to prove that that's something you're good at. But how do you get that first gig? And I honestly think it's slightly easier just being a founder because at least no one had to interview me. I just did it. So if I'd say to any woman, man looking for a kind of career change into startup, it is worth trying to look for some sort of, I don't know, internships or projects or just kind of ways to get involved, even if it's just temporary. And maybe it's unpaid. And I hate unpaid internships. I'd always rather everyone gets paid. But, if that's the way to prove that you've got that experience, that's going to serve you better, in my opinion, than going off and doing a degree or doing a course, because you're actually learning on the coalface, talking to the founders, really understanding that pace. And you'll have a lot more going into an interview to share with your interviewer than sitting in a classroom. So yeah, I would say really trying to get that experience at a startup is useful. There are things, especially in this sustainability space, and I'll share a few links afterwards, 'cause I actually can't remember all their names off the top of my head, but there are some free training programs that you can do on sustainability. I think one of the big tech companies actually runs a free one. I can't remember exactly who it is, but I've got the link on my laptop, so I'll share it. Those kind of things are good to know, so you've got the language around sustainability and reporting and climate. But again, I think it's more important that you've actually gone and worked with founders or worked in a small team and been part of that environment to prove that you're ready to take on a full-time role.
Awesome. I think the internships and projects, even though you say unpaid, I think when you're making a career move, it could actually be an incredibly good investment.
I mean, I agree. Yeah, it could be just 8 weeks. It could be part-time. It doesn't mean you have to completely forego your income from another job. You could just be doing something part-time or something like that. So yeah, I do think it really proves to the founders or whoever you're then applying for a role with, that you are committed to the transition and that you are willing to learn and kind of start from scratch and be comfortable with that starting from scratch. Because if you've got the experience from a large company and maybe a leadership role, that is amazing. Like that is gold to a founder, somebody that's got that experience. If you can then complement that with the hustle and fast-paced nature of a startup, I think that's a great candidate and someone we would certainly be wanting to talk to.
Nice. I'm also thinking, if you're preparing for an interview, maybe demonstrate some good examples of growth mindset and,
Yes.
dusting yourself off when something's gone wrong, because
Yes.
you think that, because everyone's been through that normally, haven't they? But it's demonstrating that you were straight away the next day, maybe problem solving or just keeping on going, finding another way to achieve what you need to achieve.
Yeah, I love that. I was actually good timing because I was literally searching for some good interview questions this morning, because we're about to interview for a growth role in the UK because we're launching over there. So it's a tough gig in the sense that it's going to be somebody that's starting the team over there from scratch. So, you've not got the infrastructure of an existing team. And I was looking up some good questions, and the one I loved the most was, what would you specifically do for us? And that would get to the heart of a good candidate for me, because you want to know specifically on day one through to, day 90, what are you going to do to help us? You can't then talk in the kind of fluffy terms of like, I will learn and then I will grow and then I will sell. It's like, specifically, what are the actions you're going to take? And as founders, you probably have limited resources, limited budget. So, every dollar spent on a salary, you need to feel confident that it's gonna move the needle in terms of your growth KPIs. So if they can prove to you that they're gonna start doing something really meaningful from day one, that would give me so much confidence.
That's really good tip for anyone listening. And I also think, if you're preparing a question response like that, it's a very good test for yourself to know how suitable you are in that job, because you actually think, what would I tangibly do? Actually.
Yeah, and lean on your networks for that, right? Because because you haven't got the experience doesn't mean you can't learn. So pick up the phone to a friend of yours that does work in a startup or has worked in a startup, or get introduced to a founder. I'd be happy to talk to somebody that was about to make this move and wants a bit of advice. You can learn very quickly and go, what should I do on the first day? And that, then you do it. As long as you've got the confidence to try it out, I think that would be much better than reading, kind of going into it and going, oh, I'm actually not competent. I'm not going to be able to do this role.
Excellent. You really soak up the environment at the same time as understanding the specifics, I think. Thank you so much for your time, Kat, and really wishing you lots of luck. And this expansion into the UK sounds really exciting, which probably helps me with my final question, which was, what's next for Trace and for you guys as a team? What does the future look like?
Yeah. Oh, it's a big year for us. I think anyone who's tapped into the news, particularly startup news and capital markets, can see that since 2021, there's been a real downturn in terms of investment into startup space. The bar has got a lot higher in terms of how you can get awarded investment because the cost of capital has gone up. So that's really made us focus incredibly hard on what do we need to deliver, and we need to think about being more focused instead of trying lots of things. So for us, it's all about growth, proving that we can expand into the UK. And again, that might not be a huge amount of expansion, but just starting to get early traction. But otherwise, just improving our sales cycle here in Australia and showing that we can continue to onboard new customers at a lower cost. That's what investors want to see, is that, not growth at all costs. They want to actually see economic scale. And that's what we're focused on proving. So if we can do that, then we can raise more capital into next year. That will then unlock our opportunity to triple the size of the team, double down on our product, really build like the most amazing tool that we can, and then start developing the team into the global market.
Let's go. Fired up. It's Monday. We're recording this, so that sounds like a really good call to action. It's a fantastic platform. So you've done incredibly well, and we look forward to hearing, what's next and seeing it everywhere. So thank you so much for sharing your advice as well to everyone listening.
So welcome, Hannah. Thanks for having me.
Take care.